By the way, what do you think was the Tabasco for the ad that we did? Target, guy who's got average teeth. Is that who we're targeting? What's the benefit? Wide variety of gifts to make your family happy, make your recipients happy, make them happier than ever because now there's more to choose from in terms of gifts. Show your thoughtfulness because of the wide range of gift choices from 1-800-Flowers.com. Target, busy on the young side, computer literate people on the go. Support for a wide variety of gifts, all the visuals. Prince Charles has coronavirus. I just saw, oh my goodness, just showed up on my phone from the Washington Post. Oh my, it's about 11 minutes to 7 in the morning now on Wednesday morning, the 25th. Supports all of the visual. We show all the different products other than flowers, right? Brand character, bland, helpful, warm, friendly, bland. Offer. Well, that's the missing part. I should have known better. We did eventually offer 10% off if you order. And anyway. But here's what we did before we aired the ad, this ad. We did what's called recall testing. This is where a research company will set up a scenario where they'll insert your ad into a regular TV program, and along with other ads, somewhere in the pod. I don't remember having any control over where it runs in the pod, and I think they might vary it, from person to person. I don't really remember though, but it would be legitimate if they did. More legitimate research if they did. And then they asked the people to watch the TV show, and you just run the ads in it, and after the show you interview the person, and you ask them, "Did you like the show?" "Yeah, it was all right." Say, do you remember any of the ads that ran in the show? And that's the first key. The percent of people who remember your ad without them mentioning the brand name, just asking, "Do you remember any ad?" That's your most important score. And typically you want something 20% or more of the people remembering your ad and bringing it up without it being asked about. And if they mention your ad without being asked, you're going to say, "Well, what do you remember about the ad?" And here's where you want them to play back the key piece of communication. You want them to play back. In our case, we wanted them to play back 800 Flowers has more than just flowers. They have food and stuff like that, because that was really the piece of news. And let me tell you, folks, when you have an actual piece of news about your product where it's better, that's what you focus your marketing on. And so we actually got good scores for unaided recall and for playback of more than flowers. So based on that little check, well, let's now run this ad in all these expensive media and see what it does for us. And that's an example of somebody running some kind of a recall test. Okay, so now we've talked about buying television, right? We talked about national versus local, network versus spot TV. We talked about using the squad research to help you get some prices for wherever you're talking to. negotiating with. We talked about the Nielsen DMAs. If you're buying locally, that's what you're buying. We looked at where the ratings come from. And typically, if you're buying local, you're buying rating points. So if a station says I have a 7 rating in my DMA, averagely over the month, every time you buy a spot, you're, on whatever show it is, you're looking at what the rating is of that show. And if it's a 7, then you've just bought 7 points, right? And then if you actually air your spot, by the way, 2 times during the same show, you want them to be in different 15-minute blocks of the show. So if you air at the beginning of the show and then the end before the next show, you've got you're in 2 15-minute segments, and that's 7 points plus 7 points. You just bought 14 points. Right? Okay. Anyway, we talked about that. We talked about creative. We talked about where you want to put the ad in the commercial pod. That's important. We talked about recall testing. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the industry, TV industry, the industry that's so much in flux. And the overall move within the industry, as is the case with all media, and probably more in TV than with anything, however, is a move towards consolidation. People are gobbling each other up, frankly. I mean, you've got companies like AT&T that are buying HBO. So the players who have the wires and the airwaves are getting into programming. Players who have hardware like Apple, but also some software like iTunes, but not their own content, right, with iTunes. Apple is getting into streaming TV. You've got Fox, Rupert Murdoch's company, Fox News, or Fox, I should say. He's very old, right? I think he's 88 or 89. He wants to cash out, I guess. They want to get some cash, so they are selling all their entertainment assets, all the old programs and any future programs of The Simpsons and Family Guy and all kinds of other things. Fox has sold those to Disney, and Disney will add all that library and everything to its streaming service and to what it offers. And this is Disney Plus, which has now come out, as we all know. Pretty cheap. I think it's $5.99 a month. And Fox has kept its sports division and its news division, which are both appointment-based watching. I mean, watching, news from last month is usually not too interesting. It's who wants yesterday's paper, right? You wrap the fish with it, the fish and chips with it. Or in the case of Luca Brasi, The Godfather, you wrap just a dead raw fish in it and deliver it to the opposing mafia family, with giving them a little message about Luca sleeping with the fishes. Anyway, Fox and Rupert Murdoch and his family have kept sports programming and the news programming, the appointment-based program. So it's consolidation. There's also this move in the entertainment area towards streaming more and more. And here are some of the overall, just the players in here, right? You've got some new ones now, like YouTube, with a lot of video, right? Video channels, even. An amazing phenomenon on YouTube. You've got Hulu, which is another streaming service. This one you can buy with ads or without ads, which is a model that we may see more streaming services adopt at some point, particularly as there's so many of them that it's hard to afford them all. Here are some networks. I want to make sure to mention, we haven't really mentioned very much, that there are different language networks. Univision and Telemundo here in the U.S. And actually just saying it's different language, Spanish language, isn't entirely accurate because a lot of the programming on these networks is actually in English. But because just reflecting the fact that, further generations of Latino families speak English. But the programming is still geared for them. It's their programming. And so anyway, this is programming that's aimed at, different segments of our population, as is PBS. PBS is another important network, coming along strong. It's been around for a while, but coming along strong, I think in the 60s, 70s, 80s, has some pretty cool programming. It's not ad supported. It's supported by donations from viewers. It's supported somewhat by the government, and it is supported also somewhat by sponsors. So they do mention sponsors and let them show videos, etc., but they can't sell too hard, run a bunch of offers and things like that. So PBS, some very high quality programming. What we haven't talked about are the people that own the cables too much. Of course, AT&T is one. Comcast is another biggie, and they actually are partnered. They own NBC, by the way. And Spectrum is another big. Charter Spectrum is another very, very big operator, owning wires. And so AT&T bought the entertainment property of HBO, but HBO was, Time Warner Cable was sold to Charter Spectrum, I believe. And here's some cable networks. HBO was the first subscriber network. It really broke open new territory, launched by Time Warner in the 80s, the mid-80s. ESPN, sports, home shopping network, another interesting concept for television. And Nickelodeon. We haven't really talked too much about children's programming. I'm going to say a word or two about it now. Yeah, in fact, well, when we did talk about it, it was a little while ago. We talked about iCarly, which was broadcast on Nickelodeon. And just, of course, children's programming on TV, we don't have children-targeted content in every medium. I don't think the New York Times has a kids section. Papers, some of them used to have comic sections, which kids tended to like. New York Times doesn't have that. No, not too many papers have kids sections anymore. But TV has always had children's programming, particularly on the weekends. So, for instance, you may recall the 1950s top 10 TV programs thing that we watched. I hope you watched. The Lone Ranger was kids programming, and I used to watch it every morning. It was the first thing that came on air, in black and white on the TV set in our living room. And I, wake up early and pad down to the living room and pull up a chair in front of the TV, a little too close. Turn it on and watch Hey I Ho Silver from the Lone Ranger. Anyway, and there are people on there advertising to kids. In fact, this is a book we could do, as I say, a whole course about children's advertising. This is a book that came out, I want to say in the 90s, early 90s, about children, television, and the First Amendment. The book's called Abandoned in the Wasteland. And one reason I thought to bring it up, this is an example of me just adding stuff to this presentation. It's about media targeted to children. There's two authors. The first is a gentleman named Newton Minow, who, under John Kennedy, President Kennedy in the early 60s, was chair of the Federal Communications Commission. Newton Minow, very early on in his chairmanship, gave a speech to the Association of National Broadcasters, which is a very famous speech assessing the quality of programming overall in the country at that point. And what he said was that, in his opinion, television was a vast wasteland.